Hello, everybody. Welcome to Shattering the Stigma, addressing and understanding mental health in the workplace. My name is Jen Trum, and as always, with me is Christy Lamka. Hi, Christy.
Hey Jen, hello everyone. Happy to be here today.
Very happy to be here. So, we are in the fourth of our five-part series addressing mental health care in the workplace. And so, in just a moment, Christy is going to be doing like a little summary and recap. So, if today is your first time joining us over the course of this Mental Health Awareness Month, series, do not worry. We've got both the summary and also all of the recordings and video that we're happy to share with you a little bit later. But where I wanted to start today is today's session is going to be talking about like options, right? Like there are so many different options, and there's so much that I think can get really overwhelming for so many of us out there when it comes to all the different, mental health resources and programs and services and all the things. But another thing that I think is really important to talk about that I personally know quite a bit about is sometimes the getting out of our own way as HR professionals that we need to do in order to be able to see the big picture when it comes to addressing mental health. Let me give you an example. So Christy and I have talked about this a couple of times, but I definitely see myself and so many other HR professionals do as almost like wearing a mask, right? Like here we are wanting to be the representative, wanting to be, credible and all the things and stuff. And so when it comes to addressing things that might be a little more sensitive, might be a little bit more kind of putting us in possibly a position that might be needing a little bit more of vulnerability, that can be really tough for many of us in HR. And so one of the things that I noticed over my 22-year career in HR is that as I started to kind of become aware of, because really that's always the first step, is becoming aware of that perhaps I'm not fully engaging in conversations around mental health support and mental health care in the way that perhaps I could, because I don't want to be seen as blah blah blah, right? Like I want to have a certain perception that puts me in a place that I am seen as, competent and credible and all the things. And it wasn't until I started working for an organization that talked openly and freely about things that in my career I'd never seen or heard of before, talking openly about mental health, talking openly about self-care days, right? Like I'd never really heard and seen that before in an organization. And slowly but surely, it allowed me personally to start breaking down my own walls when it came to talking openly and honestly about my own personal mental health struggles and mental health care at times, in order to be able to recognize how much of a superpower that can be when it comes to really engaging at the fullest level when it comes to talking about mental health care resources and support in the workplace. So I wanted to share that really as like an offering to those out there that do find it understandably uncomfortable to talk about these things at work, right? Like it's absolutely okay. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to be, honest and open about that. Chrissy, I'm curious from your perspective, like, have you kind of recognized that in the past, those that come to, your organization are looking for that and struggle with that own kind of like transparency and openness with themselves to be able to really address it at that bigger level organizationally?
Definitely. I mean, I've seen that with HR professionals. I've seen that with other leadership, including, C-suite leadership. Um, Oftentimes, anyone in any type of leadership position that has the power to make change in an organization kind of sometimes can have that, I don't know, hesitation where they say, okay, if I admit my own struggles, if I, lower this veil of perfection and people realize, wait, I'm not perfect, or I have these concerns or feelings or whatever it might be, there is oftentimes a kind of wall, right, that we put up, and a mask, like you say, where we don't want people to see us in a different light than what we think we should be, right?
Mhm.
And the fact of the matter is, the only thing that we should be is what we are. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and some of the things we've talked about throughout the series, is exactly that: how to make those changes in a way that, hopefully it doesn't feel like you're hitting up against a barrier. These are meant to be very, accessible, I guess, changes for people to do without having that personal worry that kind of comes along with it.
Yeah, totally. And I think too that it's a journey, right? Like, to start to recognize within ourselves maybe where we have not pushed those barriers a little bit, and then start to kind of get that muscle in to be able to maybe ask those questions and push ourselves to that place where we can start having those little bit more uncomfortable conversations in the workplace. So with
Right.
that, let me go ahead and let's share our screen and get moving. All right, you able to see that?
Yes, perfect.
All right. So again, just a bit of an introduction. Christy is I don't know why I was going to introduce you,
No,
Christy.
introduce me. Go ahead, Jen. It's fine
Chief
with me.
Operating Officer and co-founder from Thrive 360, and myself, a life coach from Compelling Future Coaching. So, Christy, let's jump in and do a little bit of a review from what we have learned and talked about for the last 3 weeks.
Perfect. All right. So I'll start with kind of from an individual side, what we've learned. So first and foremost, if you all remember from, the first and second episodes of the series, we talked about what the barriers are to mental health, what the barriers are to helping yourself in these areas. And then we talked about what you can do to start self-care now and really make that a part of your routine. And so I wanted to talk through really the top three, in my opinion, at least the top three takeaways from that conversation about self-care. The first one is to find what works for you. If you all remember, one of the things that we discussed is that, something that works for me for self-care might not be the same thing that works for Jen, right? Like, everyone has their own kind of likes and things that make you feel relaxed or stress relief. And it might not even look the same as your partner or other people in your household. And so to not feel pressured by what society or your friends or family are saying, hey, try doing this. Instead, try out some things, and then find that, like Jen said earlier, self-awareness to really sit with yourself and say, okay, how do I feel? How do I feel in this moment? When do I need self-care? What does that look like for me in terms of frequency of doing things for myself? What types of things am I going to do for myself that make me feel my best? And really having that non-judgmental self-awareness, right? And meaning, don't judge yourself, don't judge your reactions to whatever it is that you're doing. But instead of judgment, really just be aware of that and appreciate your body and mind telling you what it needs. Also, setting a self-care routine. For me personally, this has made a very big impact. So this is maybe more of a biased tip for myself. But, there are two ways to look at self-care and caring for our own mental health. One is to react to when you're feeling stressed, or when burnout feels like it's coming on, or when something is coming up that's going to be stressful. That's one way. Another way, which is what I personally would recommend, would be being proactive and setting a routine before you get to a point that, a stressful situation is coming up, or that you are actively feeling stressed or burnt out. So if you set some kind of self-care routine, it doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be every week. It could be whatever looks plausible for you and what you believe you can stick with. And so one recommendation I would make for self-care routines is to actually write it down. And for me, I like to schedule that into my calendar because we're all a lot of times kind of tied to our calendar and our schedules. And so it's nice to make sure that you have written down what you're going to do so that you're not kind of scrambling at, okay, I set aside this hour for self-care, but what is that going to look like? And you spend an hour trying to figure out what you need in that moment. So really setting that plan ahead of time. Which brings me into the third point, which, like I said, making self-care a priority proactively. So get ahead of those stressful situations. And when I say make it a priority, what I mean by that is, we talked about in, I believe, episode 2, that it's oftentimes easier for us and people in general to make time for others or make time for obligations like work, which I'm not telling you to let your work fall by the wayside, but it's sometimes not as easy to make ourselves a priority. So if you have that time set aside for self-care, I simply urge you to keep that time and keep your self-care routine sacred in the way that, if something else comes in and someone asks you to do whatever it may be, try to schedule around that time that you've already committed to, because that's showing your mind and your body that you're committed to yourself and your own well-being. So self-care is not selfish. Showing up for yourself means showing up for other people better, right? So if we do the opposite of this and we wait until we're really stressed out and then we seek self-care, we're not showing up as our best self in anything that we're doing, whether that's work or home life. Really setting that routine into motion and making it a part of our well-being journey, and it is a journey, is important. So that's what I'll say on self-care for right now. I see someone, Sharon, thank you for saying self-care is an investment in ourselves. It absolutely is. And being our best self means caring for ourselves, being committed to ourselves, and making ourselves a priority. So before we move on to organizational, Jen, is there anything you want to share or add to about individual self-care?
Yeah, the one thing that I was thinking as I was reading this is like, I think that I've gotten caught up in, and I think so many people get caught up in wanting self-care to feel good, right? That thinking that self-care is about feeling better, right? I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, and I need self-care to feel better. That's one of the interesting like myths about self-care, because it sometimes I kind of think of Mel Robbins, who's one of my favorite like online coaches, but sometimes it's not going to feel good, right? The workout that we need to do, the working our body, the eating of things that we would much rather eat junk food, right? Like it's important with self-care to remember that consistency and that commitment that you're going to make to yourself is not always going to be something that you're going to feel like doing. And it's important to get into the practice of discipline and recognize that it's the disciplined practice that's going to most benefit you.
Absolutely. And sticking with it too. I mean, if your first week trying out self-care, it doesn't feel quite right, that's normal. So that's why we go back to, the idea of judgment and not judging yourself and kind of how you're reacting to situations, but instead just thoughtfully reacting to it and seeing what you need. I also want to respond to just a few things in the chat before I move on to organizational. We have a note in here from Randy saying it's okay to say no to others without apology. Absolutely. Again, self-care is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not selfish. And I think a lot of people, myself included, struggle with boundaries because I know a lot of people on the call are HR professionals, which is generally made of people who are, you know, empathetic. They have a lot of empathy for others, and I myself, I'm quite the people pleaser, I have to say. So I just want to make sure everyone's feeling their best all the time. So and sometimes I can put myself to the side just to make sure others are feeling their best. And in the long run, that's not what I should be doing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And I
setting boundaries.
love, yes. And I love, Janita, we're all working on it, right? Like, I think every day that we show up for ourselves and we do that one thing, if we can look at it in bite-sized pieces and then make sure, one of the things that a dear friend of mine said recently is celebrate your wins, as
Yeah.
small as they might be, to celebrate our little victories of, I actually went to the gym today, I actually ate that salad, and celebrate that. I think is something that, subconsciously there is some massive power in that.
Yeah. And I'll also add to that too, not dwelling in any guilt. Guilt is such a powerful negative emotion to feel that, you know, if one day you struggle for whatever reason with whatever it is you wanted to do, that's okay. Just keep moving forward. Again, this goes back to not judging yourself, not holding that guilt, like, oh, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have, done this differently, or whatever that might be. Instead, move forward and say, tomorrow I'm going to do this, and I'm going to think for myself. I'm going to do these things for myself tomorrow. And so that looking ahead is definitely important. And yes, Sharon, part of self-care is learning what we will say a thoughtful yes to. I love that.
Yeah, and thoughtful no.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'll move on. And I love the activity in the chat, by the way. Please keep it coming. So now let's talk about organizational shifts and really review what we've discussed throughout the series for organizational shifts. First and foremost, start at the top. So we talk about kind of that mask that we put on, and I think a lot of people in leadership positions put on, where maybe they're resistant to change, resistant to trying something new, and being kind of, put on the line for trying something new sometimes. And so it really is important to start at the top, make sure your leadership is leading in a way that it trickles down to the rest of the organization, which brings me to lead by example. If it's okay, I'll actually give an example for this. I think we've all been in organizations and work environments that are not as understanding or conducive to any type of mental health needs or individual needs, anything like that. So one of the things that at our company, obviously we're all about well-being. That's literally what our company is built on. So it was very important for us to intentionally make sure that our employees' well-being is at the very forefront. So I'm going to give two examples at this. Actually, I just thought of a second one that is kind of two different approaches to this. So on one side, when we hire, and I understand this might not necessarily be plausible for all organizations, but for us personally, when we hire, we like to have a very open and honest conversation about an employee's needs. And when I say needs, I mean really understanding how they work best, what communication styles are best for them to be their most successful, what they need in terms of money, and what they need in terms of types of leadership that works best for them. Again, I understand not all of that can be controlled, but understanding that going in and understanding what an employee needs has made such a difference in our own employees' productivity and growth and happiness and retention at the company, frankly. And so, with that, we've had a number of employees where we go through the interviewing process, and then we get to the hard conversations about money and about these needs, like I talk about. And I've had people say, well, I'm really trying to hit X goal. Maybe that's buying a house, for example. I've had that as an example. And so I say, okay, let's work together and see if we can get you what you need so that this job and what you're lacking from this job is not causing outside stress, right? Because if your employees are stressed about, making rent payments, if your employees are stressed about not being able to communicate with their bosses effectively, or they're stressed about feeling like they're not being heard in meetings because of communication style differences, that's going to affect their work. So setting up that organizational success at the hiring stage, at the very beginning, understanding what that looks like, and then sharing that with maybe that employee's manager and say, this is what this person needs. If you struggle communicating with them, here's, some suggestions. I'm telling you, and you'll just have to see it for yourself, that makes such a big difference in employee performance. And again, retention and happiness. And then the second example I'll share with that, for starting at the top and leading by example, is pretty recently we had a deadline of something that we were trying to complete. We had a project that was nearing completion, and there was a very hard deadline that something had to be done, and we were nearing the last week right before it was about to be completed. And one of our team members who was working on that project had a family emergency. And I won't go into the details, but it required him to not be able to work for a few days. So there's options there, right? So one option might be to look at that employee who's having this situation and treat them like a number and say, you know what, I'm sorry that you're dealing with this situation, but we have a deadline. So you're just going to have to figure it out, and you're just going to have to get it done. That's one option. Okay. Second option might be to give it to another team member, and all the other, people working on the project say, okay, I know that you're already most likely at your capacity, and that you're most likely already putting in extra hours and effort to get this project to completion, but we need you to support this other person and pile on more to your workload. That's a second option. Okay. The third option, and we'll see which one you all think we ended up going with. The third option is to reevaluate the deadline. And I'll just give away the answer. That's what we did. we put that employee's mental health first. We put the team members' mental health first. And we said, you know what? It's just not worth it to upset our organization, to upset these individuals in an already stressful time. We would rather push this out a few days so that people feel comfortable. And so again, I understand that sometimes might not be possible, but the fact of the matter is a few days won't make that big of a difference in the scheme of things for an organization, but that could make a world of difference for an individual who's going through a traumatic time. So that's just one thing I want to point out there. Again, I know not everyone has that flexibility that we have, but that's just kind of one way I'll point out to look at things. And then the last point is just supporting growth and understanding proactively. So again, with individual self-care and organizational change, that proactive element really is key. And giving your employees a resource that they can use before they get to a stressful situation, I mean, it really does make such a difference. And then again, supporting growth. I know a lot of times we see organizations where people care more about their own success and their own growth in the company than letting others grow with them. And so those organizations that allow everyone to grow and really help each other on that path to growth, being understanding of challenges that might be happening either in personal life or at work, those are the organizations that will get ahead and will keep their employees and will have employees that appreciate you for helping them grow, right? So later on in this talk, we're going to talk about some things you can implement that are proactive and that can kind of support that growth and give people resources ahead of time. So, but yeah, just to very high level cover those things. Jen, any thoughts you have on that before we move on to the examples?
Yeah, I think, it definitely, I've personally seen quite a beautiful shift. I mean, it's so interesting when you talk about like what's come of COVID and all the different changes that have transpired over the last few years. But truly, I think the level of conversations that I see in organizations when it comes to things like this is just, it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see that shift and to see examples like what you shared more and more. It gives
Yeah.
me a lot of hope. It's really encouraging to see that happening. So for those of you out there who are really struggling because of the hard-headedness at the top, know that there's hope out there. There
Yeah.
are other organizations that are making those moves, and there's hope to try to move that dial forward by pushing on having the conversations that I think for so long, so many of us have hesitated to have. So yeah, I think it's so good.
Yeah, and there's evidence to support it, right? So that's the thing. The hard-headedness at the top, I hope and believe will soon be fading away because of the evidence that really supports these types of ways to run companies, frankly.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's get into the meat of today and talk about like what suggestions we can provide when it comes to having the conversation, right? To really start to push and advocate for greater mental health. And one of the things that I'll say about this, kind of going back to the mask and having that challenging dynamic of getting outside of my own head, is recognizing that when you are in that position where you have the opportunity and potential to really truly make an impact in this area that is so needed, and we kind of see from the data and everything coming out, when you are placed in that role, really seizing this as an opportunity and to do the homework, to spend the time. And that's really where I have that number one bullet of gathering the data first. It's one thing to feel emotionally passionate about something, right? To like really feel it with all my heart, that I know that this is needed. I've seen it on CNN. I've seen it here, I've seen it there, but not coming to the table with the data and facts that are going to support your particular industry, right? Your particular organization, I think is massively important. And what I've seen personally, what truly is going to help move that dial sooner rather than later. And I think for so many of us, that's common sense, but I think it's really important to make sure that it's something that we talk about. I think to frame it as a business issue, right? And that's kind of going back to what I was saying at the beginning, how hard it can kind of be to separate the personalness of it, right? To separate kind of the emotional piece of it, but to recognize that businesses are starting to pay attention, that this is a business issue, right? When it comes to absenteeism, it comes to turnover, it comes to retention, it comes to motivation, engagement, all of those things are very much connected to how people show up, right? How people feel, what is, what they're putting in, the input, output. And as much as we, have kind of, I think, maybe ignored the reality of it previously, I think now it's front and center that mental health plays a big part in every single one of those. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing is I think those of us who have the opportunity to make that impact must work at, for ourselves, getting comfortable, being a little uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
as challenging as that can be, the more that we do it, and even if it's amongst ourselves in our own community, the more that we do it, the more that we'll be able to show up with the conviction that I think is so needed and so massively crucial when it comes to being able to push that dial. Anything
Yeah.
to add on this, Christy, before we skip to the next slide?
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important. All of these things are really important to be prepared and to feel like it's okay and good and right to have these conversations, both individually and for the organization. No, everything you said was great, Jen.
Perfect. Okay. Next one. So what we want to do is talk through some different ways, right? The how-tos of actually making this happen. We've talked before about, our own personal self-care and why it matters, but now let's talk about how do we do it? Where do we start? And I think the biggest thing to consider is once you have gathered your data, really recognize what kind of information is out there in the world. The next piece that I think matters so, so tremendously is hearing the feedback of your employees, really spending that time to ask the questions that matter, to get dirty, to really go in there and listen. And here is, I think, where it can get really challenging, I think, in some aspects, is the worry of putting out the request of feedback without then the oomph of being able to follow through and address it. And I know in talking with HR people in the past and my own personal experiences with it, there can always be this hesitation of, do we ask, knowing that we don't yet know if we can address it, right? Do you have the buy-in? And that's why I think having those conversations with the senior leadership before, getting that buy-in at the high level before actually going to your employee field and saying, hey, what do you think about this? Because the last thing you want to do is kind of stir up a bunch of excitement if you don't yet have that buy-in at the top. So I think starting with that is why starting with that is so, so important. And then reaching out and getting that feedback, really learning and understanding specifically where are the issues and concerns for your employee population is such an important then next step. Would you agree,
Yeah,
Christine?
I agree. Yeah. I mean, and I want to talk about the anonymous feedback point too. Anonymity, if you're wanting people to be honest and really upfront about whatever it might be, being transparent about what that anonymity means and saying, okay, you're going to fill out this form. It will only go to HR, for example. It's not going to go to the leadership. It's not going to go to managers who might be able to pick out that you said, oh, my manager one time did this and this was upsetting. Like that doesn't really give them as much the space to be honest about what they need and what changes need to be implemented. So just being as transparent as possible. And to your point, Jen, I agree. It really needs to start with that buy-in because it hurts the morale to say, hey, we're giving you this survey so that we can listen to you and then not listen to them. Mm-hmm. So making sure that you will be able to. And I would also, just to add to that too, offer real solutions in the surveys themselves. So instead of just saying, do you wish we had a better mental health service? Yes, like that's like an easy question, but giving them options. When we've worked with companies in the past, we've formed, and this is just for us, I'm sure all organizations you might be considering, I shouldn't say all, but many organizations that you might be considering might offer this if you ask. We offer just like a quick demo video and an explanation where people can send, all right, here's what Thrive 360 is, very short. Would you be interested in this? And really understand how the company reacts to certain initiatives that you're thinking about, certain things you're considering implementing. So I would encourage that too. Whatever it is that you might be looking at, see if there's a way to actually offer that specific solution rather than being broad with it. I've noticed that employees generally appreciate the specificity a lot more.
Love that.
So.
That's a great point. Definitely. And then the last piece on this is measure over time, right? So it's one thing to ask one time, but as you are starting to build this more and more within your organization, to measure over time is truly such a gift because it allows you to see what programs, what services, what resources you may have implemented and what might be successful, what may need reworking. It's a process, right? It's not a one and done type of thing. And so making sure that you recognize that as the journey that it is versus thinking that throwing something at it is going to just solve it and be
Yeah.
done.
Absolutely.
All right. Next one. Ooh, this is brighter than it looked on Canva. All right. Next one is coverage, programs, services. What do we have and what do we need? So ensuring that your healthcare, this is such a good time, I think, as you are starting to review for open enrollment season or whatever you've got coming up, to take a look and see what do the healthcare coverages that you have, what do they cover, what don't they cover, and looking at those from the different options that are out there as you're shopping around from year to year. I think overall, I have seen over the last 4 or 5 years just the amount of coverage within healthcare programs increasing, but not to the level that it's needed. So it only kind of goes so far in terms of what is out there, which is why it is such a, I mean, there are truly beyond Thrive 360, there are truly so many different third party type of options that are out there. And one of the things that I think is such a great benefit, I think, for anyone who is, analyzing and reviewing what different options are out there, it's such a great opportunity to really find something that blends well with your organization, your culture, your employee population, all of the things that I think matter for your environment matter when it comes to what services, what programs, what insurance coverage you would want to address the what's needed for your particular organization. Um, EAPs. So Christy and I debated a little bit before the call today. Do we even include it? They're so problematic. and and really, they are. Like, I think employee assistance programs, to their benefit, I think have come, they served a purpose. And I think in some respect, they still do, right? The average utilization for EAP programs is between like 3 to 5%. That's something they're perfectly fine with in terms of EAP providers, because it's not meant to be an overall fix when it comes to mental health care or any of the other services they provide. It truly is meant to be a Band-Aid. And so looking at it from that perspective when you're wanting to implement one in your organization or to look at how you can enhance its utilization is something to keep in mind. Chrissy, any thoughts on that one?
I have so many thoughts on that one, Jen. I do. I mean, EAP, listen, I don't want to say anything, negative about EAPs. I think they are great in concept. The idea of an EAP is great. In practice, to your point, they're just not used for a variety of reasons, and they just do not fully support really what we've been talking about, and really what I believe those on the call are trying to do and wanting to do. Employee assistance programs, though, there are ways to enhance utilization of it that we've done with organizations, where if you're able to kind of help reduce that stigma up front, and if you're able to help provide different resources that maybe are more accessible to your employees, that actually can help increase EAP utilization as well. That's what we've seen, which I think is really interesting. Because what that tells me is that if whatever resource or change that you're implementing to your organization is truly changing the perception of mental health and the perception of well-being, you'll see changes in EAP as well, which is cool, actually.
Love that.
So yeah, I mean, it's like I said, EAPs, to your point, are a band-aid. They can sometimes just be a check the box kind of thing. They are wonderful if used alongside something else, is what I've personally seen. I may be biased, but that's just what I've seen with organizations we've worked with.
And Christy, because I know that you're a bit modest, but I would love if you wouldn't mind, just while we're on this page, can you give a brief summary of what you guys do at Thrive 360?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. So Thrive 360, we're kind of like a Netflix for mental health and self-care. So we have over 600 sessions from doctors and therapists. So it's professional treatment-driven content to help people be their best. And we deliver that in both 2D and in virtual reality. And our whole purpose is to help expand accessibility to mental health resources for employees. And so, like I said, part of that includes helping companies implement organizational change. We really look at where companies are at, kind of help give them tips on different things to do to improve outside of just using Thrive 360, just to improve companies. We help enhance EAP utilization. And then, of course, we provide our platform as well for people to use. And I will say too, I don't know if I told you this, Jen, but we're running a special. I hate to be like doing this on this call, but since you asked, we're running a special starting tomorrow for the month of June, where we're reducing our consumer price. So for individuals, not organizations, for individuals, we're reducing our price from $39.99, which is what it currently is, to $9.95 for the month of June, because we're really, really pushing to help more people. And we're seeing over and over again a lot of problematic things in the news and just conversations that are being had, that we decided that right now we just want to really lower that entry point and help people in a way that it's really just more accessible to everyone. So if you know someone that could use mental health resources from professionals, please send them Thrive 360. And that's my only shameless plug. And I will that's, yeah. But to your point too, Jen, I mean, even if you don't utilize our platform, which is totally fine, there are so many out there. So, I don't take it personally if you don't take Thrive 360. There are other options that are just a bit different. So just do something is all I urge from people.
Definitely just do something. And if you've never experienced like 3D technology for mental health care before, you got to check out at least the Thrive 360 website, because it's pretty cool. I mean, it's so neat, I think, just from the perspective of to see how far technology has come to be able to address the things that make it so much more convenient. And I think that that's one of the things I think I love to see of some of the new enhancements and new technologies that are up and coming. So I think for those of you out there who go to the different conferences and things that we're seeing more and more of since COVID, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to see those technologies now coming into play that are truly going to be able to help meet people where they're at. And I think that's exactly what you guys do, Chrissy, which I think is so cool.
Well, thanks, Jen.
You're welcome. Okay, let's move on. We got a few more slides to go. So option number three, when addressing mental health in your workplace, use campaigns and events, or consider campaigns and events. One of the things that I think can be really, really effective when it comes to addressing mental health is to find some way to bring it into the environment in a way that's going to get people engaged. Right. And so I think I've seen a few that have been a very, fun runs, and, for the month of, May or June or whatever, you're going to have some type of competition, have prizes, right? I think it's just this sneaky way. I mean, I say sneaky in a bad way. It's not about not But a good sneaky, right? It's a way to be able to bring it in so it doesn't feel heavy, right? It's
Yeah.
not quite so heavy, and it allows maybe some of those conversations to start flowing in ways that are going to be a little bit lighter. What have you had much experience with any campaigns, events around mental health support, Chrissy?
Absolutely. We do this all the time, actually. I love the competition route. Again, there's kind of some subtleties there about making sure that you're protecting anonymity while running those competitions, but still allowing the space for people to get their competitive side out there. Sometimes that actually helps people who maybe wouldn't otherwise admit that they're using certain resources or tools to admit that they are, because they can kind of, for lack of a better word, hide behind, well, oh, I'm just doing it for the competition, but really they're able to get that help, and it just gives people this space to try new things, talk about new things openly, and be competitive. So I think competitions and those kind of things are really, really fun.
Yeah. And I think, one other piece about it is that it allows us to start engaging in the activities that I think we know we need to be doing, which kicks off maybe building the different habits that hopefully we can continue on with. And with different organizations that have implemented things like this, they've seen a fairly good success with it. So it's a matter of executing in a way that will see that engagement from employees, and that can be incredibly beneficial for organizations.
Definitely. Yeah. Love that.
Okay. Option 4 is creating policies or training, or whatever you can do internally within your organization that's really going to help change the behaviors that I think contribute to mental health challenges. So, different policies around remote work and flexible work, and obviously over the last couple of years that was forced upon us. But what I love to see over these last couple of years are organizations that are figuring it out, right? That are really starting to take a step back and have the conversations that probably should have been having for, years and years and years, but now figuring it out from the perspective of looking at the pros and cons of what's going to be the best benefit for the employees and also as a benefit to the organization. And then coming up with policies and programs and procedures and things that within the organization are really going to help support that movement and those changes. I think for many many out there, it's still a struggle, right? I was talking to one gal just this morning who was saying that, they had all these different COVID programs that they started up with remote work and hybrid work. And now the CEO came to them earlier this week and says, we want it all eliminated. They're seeing drops in productivity. And, we can't have that without really, I think, having a more, realistic conversation around how we can implement these different strategies in a way that's going to also continue to benefit the organization, but can allow for life. And so, this employee and I came up with different strategies that I think, she'll really be able to utilize, as talking to her CEO to say, hey, it doesn't have to be all or nothing,
Right.
right? We can be very intentional and also be strategic. And so when you can start to build that in, I think it's really going to be so helpful for so many. It's just a matter of thinking outside the box in ways that we've not had to before. And then
Absolutely.
being able to put in training and workshops and panel, whatever could work for your organization to really get those conversations going and start to build in those expectations that we might need to build in within our organization that can help build the healthy practices and behaviors that are going to see improvement in mental health overall over time.
Yeah, love it.
Hey, oh, wow, we're to the end. We're to the end. Chrissy, did you have anything that you wanted to share or add in any of the previous slides before I stop sharing?
No, I mean, I think that's no. I agree with what you're saying. I think it all, like we talked about at the beginning, it starts at the top. It starts with having conversations that sometimes might be scary, but ultimately really do help both individuals and people and the companies. So yeah, just don't be afraid to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, don't be afraid to be uncomfortable, and then doing that homework and really kind of presenting it from that business case perspective is a game changer. It can be a total game changer for anyone in HR or any position where you're presenting this information to your organization.
Yeah.
All right, so as we wrap up our fourth week, let's talk about what we have to look forward to next week. Christy, I'm really excited about this. So we've got an incredible guest. You want to share a little bit more?
Okay, yeah. So our guest next week, you guys, I mean, she is an inspiration, doesn't even cut it. Like so when I first met this person, she's a provider on our website or on Thrive 360. When I first met her and she told me her story, we ended up, it was like an hour and a half call where she just told me her story. We were chatting and we ended up ending the call just like sobbing. Like we were just like, she brought me to tears with the way that she is able to respond to challenging situations in a way that uses strength and resilience and optimism, and it is truly incredible. So I won't give too much away on her story. I'll just say that she has dealt with very challenging circumstances that I hope no one on the call can even imagine. And she has done it, like I said, with such grace and strength that you want to hear it. It's an amazing story.
So I just dropped a link to next week's event in the comments. And what is the name of the gal who will be joining us next week?
Oh, sorry, it's Esha Astar. She's
Okay.
a grief specialist, and you'll understand where that comes from. And she's a mental health professional and just is a remarkable person.
Awesome. I'm so excited for it. I mean, I think our theme for this last week of the series is really about helping to provide a hope in the stories of resiliency. And, everybody has experienced challenges and obstacles and setbacks that have come along our own way, and I think that as we want to continue to openly talk about mental health, talking about those stories and being able to talk about how much we've grown and evolved ourselves, I think can be such an inspiration to others who are struggling. And so I think that's something that I am just truly passionate about, and look forward to sharing that together next week.
Absolutely. Be ready for an emotional one, you guys, but it's worth it. I promise. It's a great story.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, we will go ahead and sign off for today. Thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you again next week.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye.